Rinkitink in Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 21. Recording by Cy, Seattle. Rinkitink in Oz
by L. Frank Baum.
Chapter 21. The Wizard Finds an Enchantment. After Kaliko had failed in his attempts to destroy his guests, as has been related, the Nome King did nothing more to injure them, but treated them in a friendly manner. He refused, however, to permit Inga to see or speak with his father and mother, or even to know in what part of the underground caverns they were confined.
"You are able to protect your lives and persons, I freely admit,"
said Kaliko.
"but I firmly believe you have no power, either of magic or otherwise, to take from me the captives I have agreed to keep for King Goss."
Inga would not agree to this. He determined not to leave the caverns until he had liberated his father and mother, although he did not know how it could be accomplished. As for Rinkitink, the jolly king was well fed and had a good bed to sleep upon, so he was not worrying about anything and seemed in no hurry to go away. Kaliko and Rinkitink were engaged in pitching a game with solid gold quoits on the floor of the royal chamber, and Inga and Bilbil were watching them, when Click came running in, his hair standing on end with excitement, and cried out that the Wizard of Oz and Dorothy were approaching. Kaliko turned pale on hearing this unwelcome news, and, abandoning his game, went to sit in his ivory throne and tried to think what had brought these fearful visitors to his domain.
"Who is Dorothy?"
asked Inga.
"She's a little girl who once lived in Kansas,"
replied Click, with a shudder.
"but she now lives in Ozma's palace at the Emerald City and is a princess of Oz, which means she is a terrible foe to deal with."
"Doesn't she like the gnomes?"
inquired the boy.
"It isn't that,"
said King Kaliko with a groan.
"but she insists on the gnomes being goody-goody, which is contrary to their natures. Dorothy gets angry if I do the least thing that is wicked, and tries to make me stop it, and that naturally makes me downhearted. I can't imagine why she has come here just now, for I've been behaving very well lately. As for that Wizard of Oz, he's chock full of magic that I can't overcome, for he learned it from Glinda, who is the most powerful sorceress in the world. Oh, woe's me! Why didn't Dorothy and the Wizard stay in Oz, where they belong?"
Inga and Rinkitink listened to this with much joy, for at once the idea came to both of them to plead with Dorothy to help them. Even Bilbil pricked up his ears when he heard the Wizard of Oz mentioned, and the goat seemed much less surly and more thoughtful than usual. A few minutes later a gnome came to say that Dorothy and the Wizard had arrived and demanded admittance, so Click was sent to usher them into the royal presence of the Nome King. As soon as she came in, the little girl ran up to the boy prince and seized both his hands.
"Oh, Inga!"
she exclaimed.
"I'm so glad to find you alive and well."
Inga was astonished at so warm a greeting. Making a low bow, he said,
"I don't think we've met before, Princess."
"No, indeed,"
replied Dorothy.
"but I know all about you, and have come to help you and King Rinkitink out of your troubles."
Then she turned to the Nome King and continued,
"You ought to be ashamed of yourself, King Kaliko, to treat an honest prince and an honest king so badly."
"I haven't done anything to them,"
whined Kaliko, trembling as her eyes flashed upon him.
"No, but you tried to, and that's just as bad, if not worse,"
said Dorothy, who was very indignant.
"And now I want you to send for the King and Queen of Pingaree and have them brought here immediately."
"I won't,"
said Kaliko.
"Yes, you will,"
cried Dorothy, stamping her foot at him.
"I won't have those poor people made unhappy any longer, or separated from their little boy. Why, it's dreadful, Kaliko, and I'm surprised at you. You must be more wicked than I thought you were."
"I can't do it, Dorothy,"
said the Nome King, almost weeping with despair.
"I promised King Goss I'd keep them captives. You wouldn't ask me to break my promise, would you?"
"King Goss was a robber and an outlaw,"
she said.
"and perhaps you don't know that a storm at sea wrecked his boat while he was going back to Regos, and that he and Queen Cor were both drowned."
"Dear me!"
exclaimed Kaliko.
Is that so?
I saw it in Glinda's record book,
said Dorothy.
So now you trot out the King and Queen of Pingaree as quick as you can.
No,
persisted the contrary Nome King, shaking his head.
I won't do it. Ask me anything else and I'll try to please you, but I can't allow these friendly enemies to triumph over me.
In that case,
said Dorothy, beginning to remove the cover from her basket.
I'll show you some eggs.
Eggs!
Screamed the Nome King in horror.
Have you eggs in that basket?
A dozen of 'em,
replied Dorothy.
Then keep them there. I beg, I implore you, and I'll do anything you say,
pleaded Kaliko, his teeth chattering so that he could hardly speak.
Send for the King and Queen of Pingaree,
said Dorothy.
Go, Click,
commanded the Nome King, and Click ran away in great haste, for he was almost as frightened as his master. It was an affecting scene when the unfortunate King and Queen of Pingaree entered the chamber with sobs and tears of joy and embraced their brave and adventurous son. All the others stood silent until greetings and kisses had been exchanged, and Inga told his parents in a few words of his vain struggles to rescue them, and how Princess Dorothy had finally come to his assistance. Then King Kitticut shook the hands of his friend King Rinkitink and thanked him for so loyally supporting his son Inga. And Queen Garee kissed little Dorothy's forehead and blessed her for restoring her husband and herself to freedom. The Wizard had been standing near Bilbil the goat, and now he was surprised to hear the animal say,
"Joyful reunion, isn't it? But it makes me tired to see grown people cry like children."
"Oh!"
exclaimed the Wizard.
"How does it happen, Mr. Goat, that you, who have never been to the Land of Oz, are able to talk?"
"That's my business,"
returned Bilbil in a surly tone. The Wizard stooped down and gazed fixedly into the animal's eyes. Then he said, with a pitying sigh,
"I see. You are under an enchantment. Indeed, I believe you to be Prince Bobo of Boboland."
Bilbil made no reply, but dropped his head as if ashamed.
"This is a great discovery,"
said the Wizard, addressing Dorothy and the others in the party.
"A good many years ago, a cruel magician transformed the gallant Prince of Boboland into a talking goat. And this goat, being ashamed of his condition, ran away and was never after seen in Boboland, which is a country far to the south of here, but bordering on the deadly desert, opposite the Land of Oz. I heard of this story long ago, and know that a diligent search has been made for the enchanted prince, without result. But I'm well assured that, in the animal you call Bilbil, I have discovered the unhappy prince of Boboland."
"Dear me, Bilbil,"
said Rinkitink.
"why have you never told me this?"
"What would be the use?"
asked Bilbil in a low voice, still refusing to look up.
"The use?"
repeated Rinkitink, puzzled.
"Yes, that's the trouble,"
said the Wizard.
"It is one of the most powerful enchantments ever accomplished, and the magician is now dead, and the secret of the anti-charm lost. Even I, with all my skill, cannot restore Prince Bobo to his proper form. But I think Glinda might be able to do so. And if you will all return with Dorothy and me to the Land of Oz, where Ozma will make you welcome, I will ask Glinda to try to break this enchantment."
This was willingly agreed to, for they all welcomed the chance to visit the famous Land of Oz. So they bade good-bye to King Kaliko, whom Dorothy warned not to be wicked any more if he could help it, and the entire party returned over to the magic carpet to the Land of Oz. They filled the red wagon, which was still waiting for them, pretty full, but the Sawhorse didn't mind that, and with wonderful speed carried them safely to the Emerald City. End of Chapter 21. This recording is in the public domain. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Chapter 22. Narrated by Cy, Seattle.
Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum.
Chapter 22.
Ozma's Banquet.
Ozma had seen in her magic picture the liberation of Inga's parents and the departure of the entire party for the Emerald City. So with her usual hospitality she ordered a splendid banquet prepared, and invited all her quaint friends who were then in the Emerald City to be present that evening to meet the strangers who were to become her guests. Glinda also, in her wonderful record book, had learned of the events that had taken place in the caverns of the Nome King, and she became especially interested in the enchantment of the Prince of Boboland. So she hastily prepared several of her most powerful charms, and then summoned her flock of 16 white storks, which swiftly bore her to Ozma's palace. She arrived there before the Red Wagon did, and was warmly greeted by the girl ruler. Realizing that the costume of Queen Pingaree of Pingaree must have become sadly worn and frayed owing to her hardships and adventures, Ozma ordered a royal outfit prepared for the good queen, and had it laid in her chamber ready for her to put on as soon as she arrived, so that she would not be shamed at the banquet. New costumes were also provided for King Kitticut and King Rinkitink and Prince Inga, all cut and made and embellished in the elaborate and becoming style then prevalent in the Land of Oz, and as soon as the party arrived at the palace, Ozma's guests were escorted by her servants to their rooms that they might bathe and dress themselves. Glinda the Sorceress and the Wizard of Oz took charge of Bilbil the Goat, and went to a private room where they were not likely to be interrupted. Glinda first questioned Bilbil long and earnestly about the manner of his enchantment, and the ceremony that had been used by the magician who enchanted him. At first Bilbil protested that he did not want to be restored to his natural shape, saying that he had been forever disgraced in the eyes of his people and of the entire world by being obliged to exist as a scrawny, scraggly goat. But Glinda pointed out that any person who incurred the enmity of a wicked magician was liable to suffer a similar fate, and assured him that his misfortune would make him better beloved by his subjects when he returned to them freed from this dire enchantment. Bilbil was finally convinced of the truth of this assertion, and agreed to submit to the experiments of Glinda and the Wizard, who knew they had a hard task before them and were not at all sure that they could succeed. We know that Glinda is the most complete mistress of magic who has ever existed, and she was wise enough to guess that the clever but evil magician who had enchanted Prince Bobo had used a spell that would puzzle any ordinary wizard or sorcerer to break. Therefore she had given the matter much shrewd thought, and thought she had conceived a plan that would succeed. But because she was not positive of success, she would have no one present at the incantation except her assistant, the Wizard of Oz. First she transformed Bilbil the Goat into a lamb, and this was done quite easily. Next she transformed the lamb into an ostrich, giving it 2 legs and feet instead of 4. Then she tried to transform the ostrich into the original Prince Bobo, but this incantation was an utter failure. Glinda was not discouraged, however, but by a powerful spell transformed the ostrich into a Tottenhot, which is a lower form of a man. Then the Tottenhot was transformed into a Mifket, which was a great step in advance, and finally Glinda transformed the Mifket into a handsome young man, tall and shapely, who fell to his knees before the great sorceress and gratefully kissed her hand, admitting that he now had recovered his proper shape and was indeed Prince Bobo of Boboland. This process of magic, successful though it was in the end, had required so much time that the banquet was now awaiting their presence. Bobo was already dressed in princely raiment, and although he seemed very much humbled by his recent lowly condition, they finally persuaded him to join the festivities. When Rinkitink saw that his goat had now become a prince, he did not know whether to be sorry or glad, for he felt that he would miss the companionship of the quarrelsome animal he had so long been accustomed to ride upon, while at the same time he rejoiced that poor Bilbil had come to his own again. Prince Bobo humbly begged Rinkitink's forgiveness for having been so disagreeable to him at times, saying that the nature of a goat had influenced him, and the surly disposition he had shown was a part of his enchantment. But the jolly king assured the prince that he had really enjoyed Bilbil's grumpy speeches and forgave him readily. Indeed, they all discovered the young Prince Bobo to be an exceedingly courteous and pleasant person, although he was somewhat reserved and dignified. Ah, but it was a great feast that Ozma served in her gorgeous banquet hall that night, and everyone was as happy as could be. The Shaggy Man was there, and so was Jack Pumpkinhead and the Tin Woodman and Cap'n Bill. Beside Princess Dorothy sat Tiny Trot and Betsy Bobbin, and the three little girls were almost as sweet to look upon as was Ozma, who sat at the head of her table and outshone all her guests in loveliness. King Rinkitink was delighted with the quaint people of Oz, and laughed and joked with the Tin Man and the Pumpkin-headed Man, and found Cap'n Bill a very agreeable companion. But what amused the jolly king most were the animal guests, which Ozma always invited to her banquets and seated at a table by themselves, where they talked and chatted together as people do, but were served the sort of food their natures required. The Hungry Tiger and Cowardly Lion and the Glass Cat were much admired by Rinkitink. But when he met a mule named Hank, which Betsy Bobbin had brought to Oz, the king found the creature so comical that he laughed and chuckled until his friends thought he would choke. Then, while the banquet was still in progress, Rinkitink composed and sang a song to the mule, and they all joined in the chorus, which was something like this:
It's very queer how big an ear is worn by Mr. Donkey, and yet I fear he could not hear if it were on a monkey. 'Tis thick and strong and broad and long, and also very hairy. It's quite becoming to our Hank, but might disgrace a fairy.
This song was received with such enthusiasm that Rinkitink was prevailed upon to sing another. They gave him a little time to compose the rhyme, which he declared would be better if he could devote a month or two to its composition. But the sentiment he expressed was so admirable that nobody criticized the song or the manner in which the jolly little king sang it. Dorothy wrote down the words on a piece of paper, and here they are.
We're merry comrades all tonight, because we've won a gallant fight and conquered all our foes. We're not afraid of anything, so let us gaily laugh and sing until we seek repose. With all our grateful hearts can wish. King Goss has gone to feed the fish. Queen Cor has gone as well. King Kitticut has found his own. Prince Bobo soon will have a throne, relieved of magic spell. So let's forget the horrid strife that fell upon our peaceful life, and caused distress and pain. For very soon across the sea we'll all be sailing merrily to Pingaree again.
End of chapter 22.
In Oz, Chapter 23. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This chapter narrated by Kara Schallenberg. Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 23. The Pearl Kingdom. It was unfortunate that the famous Scarecrow, the most popular person in all Oz next to Ozma, was absent at the time of the banquet, for he happened just then to be making one of his trips through the country. But the Scarecrow had a chance later to meet Rinkitink and Inga and the King and Queen of Pingaree and Prince Bobo, for the party remained several weeks at the Emerald City, where they were royally entertained, and where both the gentle Queen Garee and the noble King Kitticut recovered much of their good spirits and composure, and tried to forget their dreadful experiences. At last, however, the king and queen desired to return to their own Pingaree, as they longed to be with their people again and see how well they had rebuilt their homes. Inga also was anxious to return, although he had been very happy in Oz, and King Rinkitink, who was happy anywhere except at Gilgad, decided to go with his former friends to Pingaree. As for Prince Bobo, he had become so greatly attached to King Rinkitink that he was loath to leave him. On a certain day they all bade good-bye to Ozma and Dorothy and Glinda and the Wizard and all their good friends in Oz, and were driven in the red wagon to the edge of the Deadly Desert, which they crossed safely on the magic carpet. They then made their way across the Nome Kingdom and the Wheeler country, where no one molested them, to the shores of the Nonestic Ocean. There they found the boat with the silver lining still lying undisturbed on the beach. There were no important adventures during the trip, and on their arrival at the Pearl Kingdom they were amazed at the beautiful appearance of the island they had left in ruins. All the houses of the people had been rebuilt, and were prettier than before, with green lawns before them and flower gardens in the backyards. The marble towers of King Kitticut's new palace were very striking and impressive, while the palace itself proved far more magnificent than it had been before the warriors from Regos destroyed it. Nikobob had been very active and skillful in directing all this work, and he had also built a pretty cottage for himself, not far from the king's palace, and there Inga found Zella, who was living very happy and contented in her new home. Not only had Nikobob accomplished all this in a comparatively brief space of time, but he had started the pearl fisheries again, and when King Kitticut returned to Pingaree, he found a quantity of fine pearls already in the royal treasury. So pleased was Kitticut with the good judgment, industry, and honesty of the former charcoal burner of Regos, that he made Nikobob his Lord High Chamberlain, and put him in charge of the pearl fisheries and all the business matters of the island kingdom. They all settled down very comfortably in the new palace, and the queen gathered her maids about her once more, and set them to work embroidering new draperies for the royal throne. Inga placed the 3 magic pearls in their silken bag, and again deposited them in the secret cavity under the tiled flooring of the banquet hall, where they could be quickly secured if danger ever threatened the now prosperous island. King Rinkitink occupied a royal guest chamber built especially for his use, and seemed in no hurry to leave his friends in Pingaree. The fat little king had to walk wherever he went, and so missed Bilbil more and more, but he seldom walked far, and he was so fond of Prince Bobo that he never regretted Bilbil's disenchantment. Indeed, the jolly monarch was welcome to remain forever in Pingaree if he wished to, for his merry disposition set smiles on the faces of all his friends, and made everyone near him as jolly as he was himself. When King Kitticut was not too busy with affairs of state, he loved to join his guest and listen to his brother monarch's songs and stories. For he found Rinkitink to be, with all his careless disposition, a shrewd philosopher, and in talking over their adventures one day, the king of Gilgad said,
"The beauty of life is its sudden changes. No one knows what is going to happen next, and so we are constantly being surprised and entertained. The many ups and downs should not discourage us, for if we are down, we know that a change is coming and we will go up again, while those who are up are almost certain to go down. My grandfather had a song which will express this, and if you will listen, I will sing it."
"Of course I will listen to your song,"
returned Kitticut,
"for it would be impolite not to."
So Rinkitink sang his grandfather's song.
"A mighty king once ruled the land, but now he's baking pies. A pauper, on the other hand, is ruling strong and wise. A tiger once in jungles raged, but now he's in a zoo. A lion captive born and caged, now roams the forest through. A man once slept a poor boy's pate, and made him weep and wail. The boy became a magistrate, and put the man in jail. A sunny day succeeds the night, it's summer, then it snows. Right often goes wrong, and wrong comes right, as every wise man knows."
End of chapter 23. Of Rinkitink in Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This chapter narrated by Kara Schallenberg. Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 24. The Captive King. One morning, just as the royal party was finishing breakfast, a servant came running to say that a great fleet of boats was approaching the island from the south. King Kitticut sprang up at once in great alarm, for he had much cause to fear strange boats. The others quickly followed him to the shore to see what invasion might be coming upon them. Inga was there with the first, and Nikobob and Zella soon joined the watchers. And presently, while all were gazing eagerly at the approaching fleet, King Rinkitink suddenly cried out,
"Get your pearls, Prince Inga! Get them quick!"
Are these our enemies, then?
asked the boy, looking with surprise upon the fat little king, who had begun to tremble violently.
"They are my people of Gilgad,"
answered Rinkitink, wiping a tear from his eye.
"I recognize my royal standards flying from the boats, so please, dear Inga, get out your pearls to protect me."
What can you fear at the hands of your own subjects?
asked Kitticut, astonished. But before his frightened guest could answer the question, Prince Bobo, who was standing beside his friend, gave an amused laugh and said,
"You are caught at last, dear Rinkitink. Your people will take you home again and oblige you to reign as king."
Rinkitink groaned aloud and clasped his hands together with a gesture of despair, an attitude so comical that the others could scarcely forbear laughing. But now the boats were landing upon the beach. They were 50 in number, beautifully decorated and upholstered, and rowed by men clad in the gay uniforms of the King of Gilgad. One splendid boat had a throne of gold in the center, over which was draped the king's royal robe of purple velvet, embroidered with gold buttercups. Rinkitink shuddered when he saw this throne, but now a tall man, handsomely dressed, approached and knelt upon the grass before his king, while all the other occupants of the boats shouted joyfully and waved their plumed hats in the air.
"Thanks to our good fortune,"
said the man who kneeled,
"we have found your majesty at last."
"Pinkerblue,"
answered Rinkitink sternly,
"I must have you hanged for thus finding me against my will."
"You think so now, your majesty, but you will never do it,"
returned Pinkerblue, rising and kissing the king's hand.
"Why won't I?"
asked Rinkitink.
"Because you are much too tender-hearted, your majesty."
It may be,
agreed Rinkitink sadly.
"It is one of my greatest failings. But what chance brought you here, my lord Pinkerblue?"
"We have searched for you everywhere, sire, and all the people of Gilgad have been in despair since you so mysteriously disappeared. We could not appoint a new king, because we did not know but that you still lived, so we set out to find you dead or alive. After visiting many islands of the Nonestic Ocean, we at last thought of Pingaree, from where come the precious pearls, and now our faithful quest has been rewarded."
"And what now?"
asked Rinkitink.
"Now, your majesty, you must come home with us like a good and dutiful king, and rule over your people,"
declared the man in a firm voice.
"I will not."
"But you must, begging your majesty's pardon for the contradiction."
"Kitticut,"
cried poor Rinkitink,
"you must save me from being captured by these, my subjects. What? Must I return to Gilgad and be forced to reign in splendid state when I much prefer to eat and sleep and sing in my own quiet way? They will make me sit in a throne 3 hours a day and listen to dry and tedious affairs of state. And I must stand up for hours at the court receptions, till I get corns on my heels, and forever must I listen to tiresome speeches and endless petitions and complaints."
"But someone must do this, your majesty,"
said Pinkerblue respectfully.
"and since you were born to be our king, you cannot escape your duty."
"'Tis a horrid fate,"
moaned Rinkitink.
"I would die willingly rather than be a king. if it did not hurt so terribly to die."
You will find it much more comfortable to reign than to die, although I fully appreciate your Majesty's difficult position, and am truly sorry for you,"
said Pinkerblue. King Kitticut had listened to this conversation thoughtfully, so now he said to his friend,
The man is right, dear Rinkitink. It is your duty to reign, since fate has made you a king, and I see no honorable escape for you. I shall grieve to lose your companionship, but I feel the separation cannot be avoided.
Rinkitink sighed.
"Then,"
said he, turning to Lord Pinkerblue,
"in 3 days I will depart with you for Gilgad, but during those 3 days I propose to feast and make merry with my good friend King Kitticut."
Then all the people of Gilgad shouted with delight and eagerly scrambled ashore to take their part in the festival. Those 3 days were long remembered in Pingaree, for never, before nor since, has such feasting and jollity been known upon that island. Rinkitink made the most of his time, and everyone laughed and sang with him by day and by night. Then at last the hour of parting arrived, and the King of Gilgad and ruler of the dominion of Rinkitink was escorted by a grand procession to his boat and seated upon his golden throne. The rowers of the 50 boats paused, with their glittering oars pointed into the air like gigantic uplifted sabres, while the people of Pingaree, men, women, and children, stood upon the shore shouting a royal farewell to the jolly king. Then came a sudden hush, while Rinkitink stood up and, with a bow to those assembled to witness his departure, sang the following song, which he had just composed for the occasion.
"Farewell, dear Isle of Pingaree, the fairest land in all the sea. No living mortals, king or churls, would scorn to wear thy precious pearls. King Kitticut, 'tis with regret I'm forced to say farewell, and yet abroad no longer can I roam, when 50 boats would drag me home. Goodbye, my Prince of Pingaree, a noble king sometime you'll be. How long and wisely may you reign, and never face a foe again."
They cheered him from the shore, they cheered him from the boats, and then all the oars of the 50 boats swept downward with a single motion and dipped their blades into the purple-hued waters of the nonestic ocean. As the boats shot swiftly over the ripples of the sea, Rinkitink turned to Prince Bobo, who had decided not to desert his former master and his present friend, and asked anxiously,
"How did you like that song, Bobo? Is it a masterpiece, do you think?"
And Bobo replied with a smile,
Like all your songs, dear Rinkitink, the sentiment far excels the poetry.
End of chapter 24, and the end of Rinkitink in Oz, by L. Frank Baum.
In Oz. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording credits. In order of appearance. King Kitticut was performed by Mohammed Musnoon.
Prince Inga was performed by Henry Fregon, San Diego, California.
The White Pearl was performed by Alana Jordan, St. Peters, Missouri.
The part of Rinkitink was performed by Jonathan Trachtenberg.
The part of Bilbil read by Chugosh.
The part of the Regos Warriors was performed by Porrick. The part of the Palace Maid was read by one Magdalene. The part of Nickabob was read by Daniel Nairn.
The part of Zella was performed by Marion Droulard.
The part of Zella's mother was played by Ada Kerman, KermanEnterprises.com.
The part of Queen Cor was performed by Jennifer Lott, British Columbia, Canada.
The part of King Goss, read by Colin McRoberts.
The part of the slave woman was read by Talia F.
Mine Gods, read by Iswa, in Belgium, in January 2009.
The part of King Calico was
read by Ralph Snelson of Springville, Utah.
The part of Click was played by Ellie Trachtenberg.
The part of the long-eared hero was played by Judith.
The part of the Gnome Lookout was read by Neve.
The part of the giant was performed
by Paul T. Williams of Austin, Texas.
The part of Dorothy was played by Susie G.
The part of Princess Ozma was played by Mira Trachtenberg.
The part of the Wizard of Oz was read by Porrick. The part of
Pinkerblue
was performed
by Peak.
Proof listening by Annalika, Jennifer Stearns, and Angleet. Book coordination by Scott Sherris and Porrick. Meta coordination by
Iswa.